"You put my dad in prison. Now I need you to get him out." She didn't whisper it. She didn't plead it. She said it the way someone reads an address off a piece of paper, certain of where they're going, just waiting for the door to open. Her name was Pip Calloway, and at 10 years old, she had taken 2 city buses across Chicago, walked up a driveway that most grown men approached with their hats in their hands, climbed 7 stone steps that were built to make people feel small, and knocked. 3 times. Loud. Cale Morrow looked down at her, the most feared man in Chicago, a man whose phone calls ended conversations that had been going on for years. He did not look amused. He looked at her the way you look at something that doesn't belong in the frame, something your eyes keep returning to because you cannot decide what category it fits. "Who sent you?" Pip looked up at him, steady, unhurried, both hands planted on her hips. "Nobody sends me anywhere," she said. "I go where I decide." Behind him, to the left, one of his men shifted his weight almost imperceptibly. To the right, the other one had gone very still. The particular stillness of a person who is trying very hard not to react to something they absolutely want to react to. Cale tilted his head slightly. "You know what happens to people who come to this door without an invitation?" Pip considered this, genuinely, the way she considered most things, fully, without rushing, as if the question deserved the respect of a real answer. "I'm guessing they usually leave faster than they came," she said. "But I'm not going to do that. So," she adjusted her glasses with one finger, "are you going to help me or not?" Okay, let's stop right here. Have you ever watched a child walk into a room that would make most adults turn around at the door and not only stay, but take a seat like they own the building? Because that is exactly what Pip Calloway just did. 10 years old, box braids, round glasses, a yellow dress with a stain on the front from the peanut butter sandwich she ate on the second bus, standing at the front entrance of the most dangerous man in Chicago's private mansion like she had a scheduled appointment and he was the one running late. If you love stories about people who refuse to be small in rooms that were designed to make them feel that way, stories about courage that doesn't announce itself, it just shows up, then subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications. Because what Pip Calloway does next, and what Cale Morrow is about to discover about the little girl on his front steps, nobody in that mansion was ready for it. The apartment on the 4th floor of Linden Court had 3 rooms, 1 working radiator, and a kitchen table with 4 chairs. They only ever used 2 of them now. The 3rd had a stack of Renee's nursing school textbooks on it. The 4th one, the one closest to the window, the one that caught the most light in the morning, nobody touched. Nobody moved it. Nobody put anything on it. It just sat there, empty, at the edge of every meal, the way an unanswered question sits at the edge of every conversation. Pip knew the shape of her mother's mornings without having to see them. She knew the 4:47 alarm, the careful way Renee moved through the dark apartment so the floorboards wouldn't wake her daughter, the specific sound of the coffee maker set to brew the night before so there was no waiting, no wasted minutes. By the time Pip's own alarm went off at 6:15, her mother was already gone. First job at the hospital, second job at the pharmacy 3 blocks east, home by 8:30 if the buses ran on time, which they did not always do. Dinner was usually something Renee had prepped the night before, labeled with reheating instructions in her careful handwriting, left on the second shelf of the refrigerator. 2 minutes, 30 seconds. Don't forget the foil. Pip always remembered the foil. She was not the kind of child who needed to be reminded of things twice. At school, she was quiet and precise. She answered when called on. She did not volunteer more than necessary, and she did not have the kind of friendships that required explanation or maintenance. Her teachers used the word self-sufficient in parent-teacher notes that Renee read and set down without quite knowing how to feel about them. Self-sufficient was a compliment. Self-sufficient was also something a 10-year-old should not have needed to become. After school, Pip came home, changed out of her uniform, did her homework at the kitchen table, ate dinner alone, and was in bed by 9. She did not watch much television. She read. She thought. She kept a notebook that she wrote in with the focused concentration of someone who understood that information, carefully organized, was a form of power. On the desk beside her bed, between the lamp and the small alarm clock with the cracked face, there was a photograph in a frame her father had made from popsicle sticks when she was 4. He had painted it yellow because yellow was her favorite color, and he had wanted her to know that he had been paying attention. In the photograph, Damon Calloway was laughing at something just outside the frame, head thrown back, completely unguarded, the way people laugh when they are not thinking about how they look. Every night before she turned off the lamp, Pip looked at it. She did not cry when she looked at it. She did not let her face do anything soft or uncertain. She looked at it the way she looked at her notebook, the way she looked at a problem she had already decided she was going to solve. Like she was checking her work. Like she was reminding herself of something that did not need to be said out loud because it had already been decided. Her father was coming home. She had not worked out all of it yet, but she would. She turned off the lamp. It had started with a conversation she was not supposed to hear. 3 months ago, 2 weeks after the sentencing, her mother's cousin Gerald had come over with a foil pan of food and stayed too long, the way people do when they feel guilty about leaving. Pip had been in her room, with the door open the exact right amount, wide enough to hear, narrow enough to be forgotten. Gerald had kept his voice low, the way adults lower their voices when they are saying the thing they actually came to say. He had used the name Cale Morrow once, quickly, like a word that was safer not to linger on. He had said the words, "set up," with the quiet certainty of someone stating something that everyone in the streets already knew, but nobody was going to stand in a courtroom and repeat. Then Renee had said Gerald's name in a specific tone, and he had stopped talking and changed the subject, and that had been that. Except for Pip, who had written the name down before she went to sleep that night. Cale Morrow. 2 words in the margin of her homework notebook, small and careful, like she was filing something away for later. Later had taken 3 months. She had been systematic about it in the way she was systematic about everything. She started with what was public. News articles, court records, anything she could find on the library computers during lunch. She learned quickly that Cale Morrow did not appear in news articles the way ordinary people did. His name surfaced at the edges of things. A company, a lawyer, a building permit, a charity donation. He existed in the official record the way a shadow exists. You could see the shape of him without ever seeing him directly, and the shape was large. What the streets knew was a different matter. Pip had grown up in this neighborhood. She understood which conversations to listen to and which ones to walk away from. She understood that certain men who sat outside certain buildings in the early evening were not simply sitting outside. They were working, and if you were a quiet, unremarkable child doing homework on the steps nearby, you became part of the furniture, and furniture heard things. She did not ask direct questions. She asked sideways ones, the kind that sounded like curiosity and landed like research. Over 6 weeks, she had built a picture that no courtroom had assembled, and no lawyer had apparently tried to. Damon Calloway had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, which was not an accident, because the wrong place had been arranged specifically for him. Pip had written it all in her notebook, the blue one with the elastic band, kept under her mattress with the kind of deliberate ordinariness that made it invisible. Names, dates, the business front, the lawyer who had appeared from nowhere on her father's case and performed just badly enough. The address on the north side that Gerald had mentioned once without meaning to, and that she had confirmed 3 different ways before she wrote it down. She had not told her mother any of it. Renee was awake before 5 a.m. and home after 8 p.m., and studying on the weekends, and holding everything together with both hands and a jaw set so tight it must have ached. She had enough to carry, more than enough. The last thing she needed was to know what her daughter was thinking. What Pip was thinking was this. She had the name, the address, and 3 months of information that nobody had thought to ask a 10-year-old for. The only question now was what she was going to do with it. She already knew the answer. She had known it since the night she wrote the name down. She just hadn't done it yet. She chose a Wednesday because Wednesdays were the one day Renee finished the early shift and went directly to class, which meant she would not be home until after 7 and would not think to check the library's closing time. Pip had thought about this. She thought about most things before she did them. She packed her school backpack the night before. Notebook, pencil case, her library card in case the lie needed supporting evidence, a granola bar and the peanut butter sandwich she made every morning because the school lunches did not hold her until dinner. She set the bag by the door and went to bed and slept without difficulty, the way she always slept, fully, without restlessness, like someone who had made their decision and was simply waiting for morning to catch up. The first bus took 22 minutes. The second took 31. She ate the sandwich on the second bus and looked out the window as the neighborhood changed around her, the buildings getting larger, the spaces between them wider, the streets quieter in the particular way of places that have decided noise is something that happens to other people. She had ridden these buses once before, 2 weeks ago, just to know the route, just to be sure. She did not like surprises. She found the house without needing to check her notebook. It sat behind a low stone wall on a wide, tree-lined street that was very clean and very still. The driveway was long and pale and flanked by hedges trimmed to the same height on both sides, which told her something about the man who lived there. Everything here was controlled. Everything was deliberate. She walked up the driveway at an even pace, and when she spotted the camera mounted above the entrance gate, angled downward, she looked directly into it without slowing down. She did not look away. Whatever was on the other side of that lens, she wanted it to see her clearly. The steps were wider than she had expected. 7 of them, gray stone, each one catching the last of the afternoon light. She climbed them without hesitating and stood at the door and knocked. Not the polite knock of someone hoping to be heard. 3 knocks, deliberate and evenly spaced, the kind that said she was not going anywhere. She heard movement inside, more than one person. The door opened and 2 men appeared first, black suits, black shirts, identical stillness. And then a 3rd figure came forward from somewhere behind them, and the 2 men stepped apart, and there he was. Cale Morrow in person was exactly what his shadow had suggested. Tall, dark-suited, unhurried. A tattoo climbed the right side of his neck. His hair was slicked back, and his hands were relaxed at his sides, and his eyes were the eyes of someone who had not been caught off guard in a very long time. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. The evening was very quiet around them. The street, the hedges, the last of the light going out of the sky. Pip put both hands on her hips. "You put my dad in prison," she said. Calm, plain, the way you state a thing you already know to be true. "Now I need you to get him out." Cale Morrow said nothing. That in itself was something. Men like Cale Morrow always had something to say. Pip filed it away, adjusted her glasses with one finger, and waited. She had taken 2 buses to get here. She was not leaving without an answer. He should have closed the door. He knew it the moment he stepped back and the girl walked past him into the entrance hall, backpack on, yellow dress, glasses straight on her nose, looking around the space with the quiet, methodical attention of someone conducting an appraisal. He had not invited her in exactly. He had simply not prevented it, which was not something that happened to Cale Morrow. Things happened because he decided they would, or they did not happen because he decided they wouldn't. There was no 3rd category. And yet here was a 3rd category, standing on his marble floor and setting her backpack down neatly beside her feet. He told himself he was curious, that was all. He was a man who liked to understand things he did not immediately understand, and this child was currently the thing he did not immediately understand. That was the only reason the door was not closed. He was curious. It meant nothing. "Talk," he said. She talked. She did not start with her father, which surprised him. She started with herself, who she was, where she lived, what she knew about how information moved through a neighborhood when adults thought children weren't paying attention. She used the word infrastructure. She was 10. He did not let his expression change, but something behind it shifted slightly, the way a door shifts in a frame when the temperature changes. She was watching his face when it happened. He could tell by the way she paused for exactly half a second and then continued without commenting on it. She had noted it. She had filed it. She moved on. Then she told him about her father. She did not tell him everything. He was certain of that. Not because her account had gaps he could identify, but because of the way she delivered it. Precise, selective, each piece of information placed exactly where it would land with the most weight. She told him what she needed him to know. She kept the rest. For a 10-year-old in a yellow dress with a peanut butter sandwich stain on the front of it, her information management was immaculate. She spoke for 11 minutes. He knew because he had a clock on the wall above the entrance table, and he tracked time the way other people breathe, without deciding to, without stopping. In 11 minutes, she laid out a version of events surrounding Damon Calloway's conviction that was more coherent and more sourced than anything his own lawyers had apparently considered worth examining. She did not accuse him directly. She presented it the way you present something you expect the other person to recognize, not as a revelation, but as a confirmation. When she finished, she looked at him for a moment, steady and unhurried. He said nothing. She picked up her backpack from the floor, settled both straps over her shoulders, and adjusted her glasses. "I'll come back on Friday," she said. He looked at her. "I didn't agree to that." "I know," she said, and walked to the door. One of his men moved to open it for her before catching himself, unsure how that had happened. She stepped out without looking back, went down the 7 stone steps at the same even pace she had climbed them, and turned left at the bottom of the driveway. Cale stood in the entrance hall in the quiet she had left behind. He thought about telling his men to turn her away on Friday. He thought about it for a long time. He had the report by Thursday morning. His second-in-command, a man named Day, who had been with him for 9 years, and who communicated primarily in single sentences and small, precise gestures, set the folder on his desk at 8:15 without being asked. That was the thing about asking Day to find out about someone. The finding out happened quickly, and the results arrived without commentary, which was how Cale preferred most things. He opened it after his first call of the morning. Pip Calloway, 10 years old, 5th grade at Alcott Elementary, 2 blocks from the apartment on Linden Court. Straight A's with a single B+ in gym that felt, reading it, like a deliberate choice rather than a failure. No disciplinary record. Teachers described her in notes that all used variations of the same word, composed. One had written, unusually self-directed. Another had written, with what seemed like a mixture of admiration and mild concern, "She seems to have already decided who she is." He read the section on Renee Calloway. 2 jobs, a nursing program she was 3 semesters into, no criminal record, no outstanding debts beyond the ordinary weight of a household running on a single income that was really 2 incomes split across too many hours. The apartment on the 4th floor, the heating bill, the grocery receipts that told a story of someone buying what was necessary and nothing beyond it. He read it again. He was not a man who read things twice. He read things once, retained what mattered, and moved. Reading something twice was a concession to uncertainty, and Cale Morrow did not make concessions to uncertainty. He made decisions, and the decisions held, and that was the end of it. He read the file a second time anyway. Then he closed it and set it on the corner of his desk and looked at it sitting there. There was something in the file that he did not look at directly. Something in the shape of it. The address on Linden Court, the name Calloway in black type at the top of the page, that pressed against something he kept in a part of himself that did not have regular visitors. It was not guilt. He was clear-eyed about that. He had made a decision years ago, and the decision had been correct by the terms he used to measure correctness, which were his own terms, which had always been sufficient. It was not guilt. It was something quieter than guilt, and older than guilt, and considerably harder to set aside. He closed the file. He called Day into the office and told him to turn the girl away on Friday. Day nodded once and left. Cale returned to his calls, his decisions, the ordinary machinery of a day that looked like control because it was control and had always been control and would continue to be control because that was how he had built his life, and he had built it well. Friday came. At 4:18 in the afternoon, Day appeared in the office doorway. Cale looked up. "She's here," Day said. Cale looked at him for a moment. "The girl," Day confirmed, in case there was any ambiguity, which there wasn't. "Should I send her away?" Outside the window, the city moved in its ordinary Friday way, unhurried, indifferent. "No," Cale said. He looked back down at his desk. "Let her in." She arrived at 4:15, which meant she had come directly from school. She was still in her uniform, navy trousers, white shirt, one collar slightly turned up in a way she appeared not to notice, with her yellow dress visible at the collar where she had layered it underneath against the cold. Her backpack was the same one. Her glasses were the same ones. She looked exactly like what she was, a child who had finished school for the day and had somewhere to be, and had decided that somewhere was here. Day let her in. She thanked him by name, which meant she had either heard someone use it on her first visit, or she had found it out herself, and both possibilities were equally unsurprising at this point. She did not ask for anything. She did not make a speech. She looked around the entrance hall for a moment, identified the bench near the door, the one used primarily for setting down bags and waiting for cars, walked to it, sat down, unzipped her backpack, and took out a textbook, a notebook, and a pencil with a small rubber eraser shaped like a star on the end. She opened the textbook to a page she had marked with a folded corner, set the notebook beside it, and began to work. That was all. The house moved around her. Two of Cale's men came through the entrance hall and went to the back. A phone rang somewhere in the east wing and was answered. Day walked past her twice on separate errands, and she did not look up from her work either time, though she shifted her notebook slightly on the second pass to keep it out of the way of his path, without being asked and without making anything of it. At some point, nobody could have said exactly when, one of the men who stood near the front entrance walked to the kitchen and came back with a glass of water and set it on the small table beside the bench. He had not been asked to do it. He stood there for a brief moment after setting it down, with the expression of a man who was not entirely sure what had just happened to him, then returned to his position. Pip looked at the glass, then at him. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once and looked at the wall. Cale found himself at the top of the stairs without having decided to go there. He stood at the railing and looked down at the entrance hall, at the bench, at the child working through what appeared from this distance to be long division with the focused patience of someone who found numbers reliable in a way the rest of the world was not. She did not look up immediately. She finished the problem she was on, wrote the answer, checked it. Then she looked up and found him at the railing without any apparent searching, as if she had known he was there for some time and had simply been waiting for a natural pause. She adjusted her glasses with one finger. "You're staring," she said. It was not an accusation, it was an observation, delivered with the same plainness she delivered everything. Cale said nothing. He pushed off the railing and went back to his office. Behind him, from somewhere in the hallway, there was a sound from Day that may have been a cough. It was not a cough. By the third visit, it was a pattern. By the fifth, it was simply what Fridays were. Pip came at 4:15, let herself be let in by whichever of Cale's men was nearest the door, sat on the bench in the entrance hall, and did her homework. Sometimes she stayed 40 minutes. Once, she stayed 2 hours and worked through an entire history assignment and what appeared to be a personal project involving a hand-drawn map of Chicago's North Side that she closed before anyone could look at it too closely. She did not demand anything on these visits. She did not raise the subject of her father unless Cale was present, and even then she did not raise it directly. She talked the way certain rivers move, constantly, naturally, as if silence were simply something that happened to other people. She talked about school, about a boy in her class named Terrence who had copied her math homework and gotten a higher grade than her because he had corrected one of her errors in the process of copying, which she found more interesting than annoying. About the heating in the apartment on Linden Court that worked on alternate days in a pattern she had begun charting to see if it was predictable, which it almost was. About her mother, often. Not with sadness, but with a specific kind of quiet pride, the way you talk about someone whose qualities you are still in the process of fully cataloging. Cale was not always visible during these visits. He was often at the top of the stairs or at the edge of a doorway, present in the way that men who are accustomed to watching things are present, without announcing it, without committing to it. Pip knew he was there. She did not always acknowledge it. She was building a picture, and she needed him to be himself, undisturbed, so the picture would be accurate. She had begun to catalog his almost reactions, the slight tension that moved through his jaw when she mentioned her father's name. Not guilt, not quite, but something in the same family, the way his eyes changed when she described her mother getting up before the sun, a change that was small and brief and considerably more complicated than sympathy. She filed each one without comment. She was not ready to use them yet. She was still collecting. On a Tuesday, he had begun permitting Tuesday visits as well, without acknowledging that he had done so, she looked up from her notebook and asked without preamble, "Has anyone ever told you the truth about yourself? Like, actually told you?" Cale was standing near the window. "I have people who tell me what I need to know," he said. Pip considered this with the genuine, thoughtful attention she brought to problems worth solving. "That's not the same thing," she said. She looked back down at her notebook and wrote something. Cale stood at the window for a moment. The city outside went about its ordinary business. He went back to his office and sat at his desk and did not immediately pick up the phone that was waiting to be picked up. He sat with what she had said in the way that he had been increasingly, and irritatingly, sitting with things she said. She was 10 years old. She was also, he was beginning to understand, building something. He could not yet see the full shape of it. That, more than anything, was what held his attention. She did not bring it on the 5th visit, or the 4th. She waited until the 6th, which told Cale something about her timing, though he did not say so. She arrived as usual, sat as usual, opened her backpack as usual. For 20 minutes, she worked through what appeared to be an English assignment, writing in the careful, unhurried hand she brought to everything. He was at the top of the stairs. He had stopped pretending he was there for any reason other than the one that was actually true. Then she reached into the front pocket of her backpack and took out a photograph. It was small, slightly creased along one edge, the color faded in the particular way of photographs that had been handled and stored and handled again over many years. She looked at it once, not with sentiment, with confirmation. And then she stood and carried it to the entrance table and set it down without comment, and sat back on the bench and picked up her pencil. She did not say anything. Cale came down the stairs. He told himself he was coming down for another reason. He could not have named what that reason was. He crossed the entrance hall to the table and looked at the photograph. 2 boys outside the old North Side Community Center on Farwell Avenue, the one that had been a rec center before the funding ran out and it became a furniture warehouse. Summer from the light, 14, 15 years old. One of them was laughing at something outside the frame, head slightly turned, completely unguarded. A laugh that Cale recognized not from memory exactly, but from the copy of it he had seen in the entrance hall for the past several weeks, sitting on a bench doing homework. The other boy was standing beside him with his hands in his pockets, not laughing, but with something in his expression that was as close to ease as that boy had ever allowed himself in a photograph. Cale looked at it for a long time. He did not react visibly. He was a man who had built his entire architecture of power on the foundation of not reacting visibly, and that did not simply stop working because a child had placed a photograph on a table. His expression did not change. But Day, standing near the corridor entrance, who had known Cale Morrow for 9 years and had learned to read the things that did not show on his face by reading the things around his face, the quality of his stillness, the almost imperceptible shift in how he was holding his weight. Day went very still himself. He had not seen this before. In 9 years, he had not seen this particular configuration of things. "You knew my dad?" Pip's voice came from the bench, not a question, the same tone she used for everything she had already confirmed 3 different ways before she said it out loud. Cale said nothing. She nodded slowly, once, the way a doctor nods when a test result comes back exactly as expected. "I thought so," she said. She picked up her pencil. She looked at the photograph one more time, then back at her notebook, then at him. Her expression was steady and clear and entirely without performance. "That makes it worse, doesn't it?" The entrance hall was very quiet. Cale did not answer. He did not need to. She had already filed it. Pip left at 6:14. Cale knew the time because he always knew the time, and because he had been watching the clock in the way of someone who is waiting for a specific thing to be over and finding that it is not, in fact, over when the thing ends. He went to his office. He sat at his desk. There were 4 calls he was supposed to return and a document that required his attention before morning. He did not touch the phone. He did not touch the document. He sat in the particular stillness of a man who has been successfully not thinking about something for a very long time and has just run out of the infrastructure that made the not thinking possible. He let himself remember. Damon Calloway, at 15, had been the kind of person who made rooms easier to be in. That was the only way Cale had ever been able to put it, even inside his own head where precision cost nothing. He did not perform it. He was not funny in the way of people who work at being funny. He was simply present in a way that made the space around him feel less like something to navigate and more like somewhere you could put your guard down, briefly, and nothing bad would happen. Cale had not had many experiences of that. He had recognized it the first time he felt it and said nothing about it and filed it away and returned to it more often than he would have admitted. They had been close for 3 years, the kind of close that does not announce itself or require maintenance, that simply exists, steadily, in the background of everything else. Cale had not had a friendship before that and had not had one since, which was a fact he had converted long ago into a point of pride, and which was not, had never been, a point of pride. The moment he was not thinking about was a Tuesday in March, 11 years ago, in a conversation that had lasted less than 4 minutes. He had been presented with a choice, not in those words, nothing was ever said in those words, between Damon and the next level of something that Cale had spent his entire life building toward. The man sitting across from him had not needed to explain the terms. Cale had understood them completely. He had sat with it for 3 minutes and 50 seconds, and then he had made the decision that a man who had decided friendships were liabilities makes when the liability is finally called. He had told himself, then and in the years since, that Damon would have done the same. He had told himself that the world they were both moving through did not have room for the kind of loyalty that cost something real. He had told himself many things, with the fluency of a man who has had years to refine the telling. He had not told himself any of it tonight, because a 10-year-old girl had placed a photograph on his entrance table and asked him a question he had no answer to that wasn't also a confession. He sat in his office in the quiet. The phone did not get picked up. The document did not get read. Outside the window, Chicago went on being Chicago, indifferent, enormous, unbothered by the things people carried quietly inside it. Cale sat with what he had done. For the first time in 11 years, he did not look away. It was Gerald who told her, which was almost poetic, given that Gerald was the reason any of this had started. He had seen Pip on the second bus, the one that went north, the one that had no reason to carry a child in a school uniform to that part of the city on a Friday afternoon. He had said nothing to Pip because something in the way she was sitting, upright and purposeful, looking out the window with the expression of someone who had somewhere important to be, had stopped him from announcing himself. He had watched her get off at the stop near the wide, tree-lined street, and he had thought about it for 4 days before he called Renee, which meant he had spent 4 days understanding that whatever he said was going to change something, and weighing whether that was his to do. He called on a Tuesday evening. Renee was home when Pip walked in from school on Wednesday. She was sitting at the kitchen table, which was not where she usually was at 4 in the afternoon. She was not doing anything. She was just sitting there in her work clothes with her hands flat on the table and a stillness about her that Pip read in the first second and filed in the second and had already prepared for by the third. Pip set her backpack down by the door. She took off her shoes. She walked to the table and sat down across from her mother and folded her hands in front of her and waited. Renee looked at her daughter for a long moment. The face she was making was complicated and controlled in equal measure. The face of a woman who had decided before this conversation began exactly how much of what she was feeling she was going to allow to be visible. "You've been going to Cale Morrow's house," she said, not a question. "Yes," Pip said. "Alone?" "Yes." "On the bus?" "Multiple times." Renee's voice was very even. The evenness cost her something. Pip could see what it cost. "You could have been hurt." "I wasn't," Pip said. "That's not the point." "I know." Pip held her mother's gaze. "But Dad could have been home by now if I'd waited for someone else to fix it." The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator made its small mechanical sound. Somewhere in the building above them, something was dropped and rolled and was still. Renee looked at her daughter, this small, precise, unfrightened person sitting across the table with her hands folded and her glasses straight, and her expression carrying the particular certainty of someone who had made all their calculations in advance and found them sound. She opened her mouth. She closed it. There was nothing she could say that was also an argument, and she knew it, and Pip knew she knew it, and neither of them said so. Renee pressed her lips together. She looked away toward the window, toward the street below, toward something outside that was easier to look at than her daughter's face right now. "Go do your homework," she said quietly. Pip got up, collected her backpack, and went to her room. Renee sat at the kitchen table until she heard the soft sound of Pip's bedroom light clicking off at 9 o'clock. Then she pressed the heel of her hand against her mouth and let out one long, careful breath, and cried without making a sound, in the way she had learned to do everything, completely, privately, so her daughter would not have to carry it. Day noticed it first in the questions. Cale had always asked precise questions, the kind with specific answers, the kind that moved things forward. How much? When? Who? The machinery of decisions that needed to be made and made cleanly. But somewhere in the weeks after the photograph, the questions changed in a way that was subtle enough that nobody else would have caught it. Day caught it because it was his job to catch things, and because he had spent 9 years learning the particular grammar of how Cale Morrow moved through the world. He started asking why. Not always, not openly, but it was there in the edges of conversations, in the slight pause before he signed off on certain things, in the way he looked at a document for a beat longer than necessary, as though he was checking it against something internal that had recently been rearranged. Day said nothing about it. It was not his place to say anything about it. He filed it the way he filed everything, and watched the way he watched everything, and waited to see what shape it was taking. The shape became clear on a Thursday afternoon in the 3rd week of November. There were 4 men in the room, a meeting that was routine, the kind that happened every few weeks to align various moving parts of various things that did not get discussed in writing. One of the men, a heavy-set man named Prell, who had been in Cale's circle for 6 years and who had always understood the room well enough to stay in it, made a remark about Damon Calloway. It was careless and dismissive, and not especially original, the kind of remark that existed to signal shared understanding, to confirm that everyone present was on the same page about the same things. It was the kind of remark that had passed without comment before, because there had never been a reason for it not to. Cale looked at Prell. He did not raise his voice. He did not change his expression in any dramatic way. He said, in exactly the tone he used for everything, that the subject was closed and they would not be returning to it. That was all. 7 words, flatly delivered, final in the way that only certain things are final. The room went very quiet. Prell nodded once and looked at the table, and did not speak again for the remainder of the meeting. Nobody else spoke either, beyond what was necessary. Day, standing near the door, looked at a point on the wall and kept his face entirely still and thought several things that he kept to himself. Pip arrived at 4:15. She came through the entrance hall, set her backpack down, and stopped. She stood in the middle of the room for a moment in the particular way she sometimes stood, not looking for something specific, just reading the air, the quality of the quiet, the way the afternoon had settled into the house. She looked at Day. She looked toward the corridor that led to Cale's office. She looked at the 2 men near the window who were studiously looking at nothing. She turned and found Cale at the edge of the doorway. She looked at him over her glasses. "Something happened," she said. It was not a question. It never was. Cale said nothing. Pip nodded once, slowly, with the quiet satisfaction of someone watching a long calculation begin to resolve in the right direction. "Good," she said. She sat down on the bench, opened her backpack, and took out her homework. She waited 3 more visits before she asked it. Cale had come to understand that Pip's timing was never accidental. She did not ask things before she was ready to hear the answer, and she did not ask things before she had decided that the other person was ready to give one. The waiting was not patience in the ordinary sense. It was precision. She was a child who understood that the right question asked at the wrong moment was a wasted question, and she did not waste things. It was a Tuesday. The house was quiet in the specific way it was quiet in the late afternoon, when the day's business had settled and the evenings had not yet begun. Pip had finished her homework 20 minutes earlier and had not packed it away, which was unusual. She was sitting with her hands folded on top of the closed notebook, looking at nothing in particular, in the manner of someone who is not thinking about what they appear to be thinking about. Cale was in the chair near the window. He had begun, without deciding to, spending time in the entrance hall during her visits, rather than observing from the stairs or the corridor edges. He was not reading the document he was holding. They both knew he was not reading it. Pip looked at him. "Why did you do it?" No preamble, no softening, not angry, not accusing, Just a child asking a question she needed the true answer to, in the same tone she used to ask about anything else she needed the true answer to. Cale looked at her for a long time. He thought about the versions of the answer he had constructed over 11 years, the ones that were accurate enough to be defensible and incomplete enough to be comfortable. He thought about the way she had looked at that photograph. He thought about 11 minutes on his marble floor, her information management immaculate, her eyes watching his face for the thing he was not showing. He set the document down. What he said was not the full answer, but it was the first piece of the answer that was not also a performance. He told her about ambition in the specific form it takes when someone has spent their whole life being told that softness is a liability. He told her about the moment on a Tuesday in March that had lasted less than 4 minutes and had taken less than 4 seconds to decide. He did not use the word friendship. He did not need to. The shape of what he said made the word visible anyway. He stopped. The room was quiet. Pip sat with what he had said in the way she sat with everything, completely, without rushing, giving it the full weight of her attention. Her hands were still folded on the notebook. Her expression had not changed into anything soft or satisfied. She was just listening. And then she was done listening. And then she was quiet for a moment longer. She looked at him. "Does it feel like it was worth it?" The question sat in the room between them. Cale looked at her, at the round glasses and the folded hands and the expression of a child who already knew the answer and was asking anyway because she wanted him to know that she knew. He did not answer. She nodded once. That was the answer, and they both understood it, and neither of them said another word about it. She did not come on a Friday or a Tuesday. She came on a Monday, which she had never done before, which told Cale something before she had said a word. She arrived at 4:15 as always. The time had become so consistent that Day had stopped mentioning it and simply ensured the door was answered. But the quality of her arrival was different. Not nervous. Pip Calloway did not do nervous, but deliberate in a way that was distinct even from her ordinary deliberateness, which was already considerable. She did not sit on the bench. She looked at Day and said, "I need to speak with him, in his office." Not a request, the same tone she used for facts she expected to be acted upon. Day looked at her for a moment, then walked to the corridor without comment. Cale was at his desk when she came in. He watched her cross the office, unhurried, straight-backed, her backpack on both shoulders, and stop in front of the desk. She looked at the surface of it, at the space between them, as if she was measuring something. Then she unzipped the front pocket of her backpack and took out the notebook. The blue one, the one with the elastic band. She set it on the desk and opened it to the first page. Cale looked at it. His expression did not change, but he read, and as he read, the quality of his stillness shifted in the way it had shifted when he looked at the photograph. Something behind the surface recalibrating around information it had not expected to encounter. She had everything. Not approximations, not rumors assembled into a plausible shape. She had names, dates, the precise sequence of introductions and pressures and strategically withheld evidence that had built the case against Damon Calloway from the inside out. The lawyer's name, the connection that did not appear in any filing, the meeting that had not officially occurred. She had found, from a bench in his entrance hall, and 2 city buses, and 3 months of the kind of careful questioning that adults discount because it is coming from a child, what every investigator and attorney involved had either missed or chosen not to see. She let him read. When he reached the last page, she closed the notebook with one hand and placed it back in her bag and zipped the pocket closed. Then she put both hands flat on the desk, fingers spread, and looked at him directly over the tops of her glasses. "I'm not here to make trouble," she said. "I'm not going to do anything with any of that." A pause, brief and precise. I'm here because my dad should be home. He should have been home a long time ago. And you're the only person who can make that happen." The office was very quiet. Outside the window, the city did what it always did, enormous and indifferent. Pip picked up her backpack and settled both straps onto her shoulders. She adjusted her glasses with one finger. She looked at him with the clear, steady gaze of a person who has said everything that needs saying and is now simply waiting for the world to catch up. "So," she said. She walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame, did not turn around. "What are you going to do?" She left without waiting for an answer. She did not need to wait. She had asked the question correctly. The answer would come on its own, or it would not, and she had done everything within her power to make sure it would. She had taken 2 buses to get here the first time. She had done enough. It happened on a Tuesday, which was an ordinary day in every visible way. Renee was between shifts, a narrow 2-hour window that she used for eating something real and starting a load of laundry, and sitting down for 20 consecutive minutes, which was the closest thing to rest her schedule permitted. Pip was at the kitchen table in her yellow dress and her round glasses, working through a science worksheet with the focused calm she brought to everything. The radiator was behaving. The afternoon light was coming through the window at the angle that made the kitchen look, briefly, like somewhere warmer than it was. Renee's phone rang at 2:47. She looked at the number. She did not recognize it, which was usually reason enough to let it go to voicemail. She answered it anyway. She could not have explained why. Something in the particular Tuesday quality of the afternoon, something in the way the light was sitting on the table. She listened for 40 seconds without speaking. Then she sat down. Not in a planned way. Her legs simply made the decision before she did, and the chair was there, and she was sitting in it. The call lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, she set the phone on the table in front of her very carefully, with the precise deliberateness of someone making sure they do not drop something. A lawyer. One she had not hired. One she had never heard of, with a downtown address and a calm, professional voice that delivered information the way people deliver information they have delivered before. Clearly, without drama, with full confidence in the facts. The conviction was being reviewed. New evidence had been submitted through appropriate channels by appropriate parties. The paperwork was entirely in order. The process had been set in motion and was already moving. Someone had covered the fees. The lawyer did not offer the name, and Renee did not ask because she already knew. The way she had known certain things since the Wednesday evening when she had sat at this table and looked at her daughter and found she had no argument. She sat with the phone in front of her and the light on the table and the sound of Pip's pencil moving across the worksheet in its steady, unhurried rhythm. "Pip," she said. The pencil stopped. Pip looked up. Renee picked up the phone and held it up without speaking. She did not know exactly what gesture she was making. She was not sure there was a word for it. It was somewhere between, "Look at this," and "I need you to know," and "I don't have the right language for what I am feeling right now." Pip looked at the phone, then at her mother's face. She took in the expression her mother was wearing, complicated and controlled, and underneath the control, something that had been wound very tight for a very long time and was only now, cautiously, beginning to release. Pip looked back at her worksheet. She picked up her pencil. "I know," she said. Her voice was calm and even and completely unsurprised. "I've been expecting that call." Renee set the phone down. She pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at her daughter. This small, precise, unfrightened person who had done in 3 months what the entire weight of the legal system had declined to do, and did not say anything for a long time. There was nothing to say that was also adequate. She got up and put the kettle on instead, because her hands needed something to do, and because some moments are so large that the only way to hold them is to also do something very small. It was a Friday morning, which was exactly right. Pip had told her mother she wanted to go alone first. Just for a minute, she had said, which was not really about the minute, and Renee had understood that completely, in the way that mothers understand the things their children communicate without knowing they are communicating them. Renee had pressed her lips together and nodded, and said she would be there by 10, and Pip had taken the bus. She was standing on the pavement at 8:53 when the door opened. She had not been sure, until that moment, that she had fully believed it would happen. She had believed in the logic of it, the notebook, the research, the sequence of events she had set in motion, the way you believe in the logic of a calculation you have checked 3 times. But there is a difference between believing in the logic of a thing and believing in the thing itself. And she understood that difference now, standing on the pavement in her yellow dress, with her hands on her hips and her glasses straight on her nose, watching the door. Damon Calloway came through it at 8:54. He was thinner than the photograph on her desk. He walked with the particular careful quality of someone who had learned, over 10 months, to move through spaces that were not his own, and had not yet remembered that some spaces were. He came through the door and down the steps, and his eyes went to the pavement, and then across the street, and then to the left, and then they found her. He stopped. He stood very still on the bottom step and looked at her. This small, upright, unmoving person on the pavement, with her hands on her hips and her chin up, and her round glasses catching the morning light. He looked at her the way you look at something you have been holding in your mind for so long that seeing it in reality requires a moment of adjustment. Pip did not run. She stood with her feet planted and let him come to her, because she had managed this moment in her head for 10 months, and she had decided, without knowing she had decided, that she was not going to sprint at it. She was going to stand still and let it arrive. He crossed the pavement and crouched down in front of her, and his eyes were very bright, and he looked at her face as if he was checking that all of it was still there and correctly arranged. "How?" he said. His voice was rough and quiet and completely undone. Pip adjusted her glasses with one finger. "I told you I'd fix it," she said. He pulled her toward him, and she went, completely, immediately, without hesitation, and let him hold her. Both his arms around her, her face against his shoulder, his chin on top of her head. She did not manage the moment, or monitor it, or file anything away. She put down every single thing she had been carrying for 10 months and let someone else hold it, just for now, just for this, because she had earned this, and she knew it, and she was going to allow herself to have it. She closed her eyes. Across the city, in an office on the north side, Cale Morrow sat at his desk in the quiet of a Friday morning. On the screen in front of him was a surveillance feed he had no operational reason to be watching. The mansion entrance, the wide stone steps, the 2 wall-mounted lights still glowing faintly in the early light. The spot where a girl in a yellow dress had stood 7 weeks ago and knocked 3 times and refused to be anything other than entirely certain. He looked at it for a long time. Then he closed the feed. He had 3 calls to return. He picked up the phone and returned them, one after another, with the same precision and control that had always defined the way he moved through the world. The calls were handled. The decisions were made. The machinery continued. But something in the room was different. Something that had occupied a specific place in him for 11 years was no longer there. Not resolved, not forgiven, not neatly concluded, simply put down. Set on the floor of a quiet office on a Friday morning by a man who had finally run out of the will to keep carrying it. He did not have a name for what that was. He looked at the closed screen for one more moment. Then he turned back to his desk. He had work to do.